She walked onto the stage with her head down, her worn-out shoes barely making a sound, and when the judges asked her name, she simply pointed to a small sign around her neck. The audience shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what to expect. But then the music started, and within 30 seconds, the entire theater was in tears. By the time she finished, even the toughest judge in America was reaching for the golden buzzer. But what happened after the show ended that night would shock the nation far more than her performance ever could. If you want to discover the incredible story of the girl who proved that the human voice is not the only way to touch a soul, hit that subscribe button right now. You will not believe what she did next. Her name was Lily Martinez, and for 17 years, she had never spoken a single word. Not because she could not speak, the doctors said her vocal cords were perfectly fine. But because she chose not to. Lily was born into a world that broke her before she could even form sentences. Her mother died giving birth to her, and her father, a broken man drowning in grief and cheap whiskey, spent most of her childhood forgetting she existed. By the age of 5, Lily had learned that words brought pain. Her father would scream at her when he was drunk, and when she cried and begged him to stop, he would only scream louder. So she stopped speaking. At first, it was a defense mechanism. But as the years passed, silence became her language. It became who she was. She was raised mostly by an elderly neighbor named Mrs. Gable, a widow who found little Lily sitting alone on the apartment steps one freezing night, waiting for a father who never came home. Mrs. Gable took her in without question, feeding her warm soup and letting her sleep on a fold-out cot in the living room. There was no money for therapy, no money for special schools. But Mrs. Gable noticed something about Lily. When music played on the old radio, Lily would close her eyes and move her fingers as if playing an invisible piano. She had no instrument, no training, but her hands danced with a rhythm that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her soul. When Lily was 12, Mrs. Gable found an old, beat-up keyboard at a garage sale for $15. She brought it home, and Lily's life changed forever. Without a single lesson, without knowing how to read a note of music, Lily began to play. She played the sounds of rain against the window. She played the feeling of hunger when there was not enough food. She played the memory of her mother's face, which she only knew from a faded photograph. Music became her voice, the only one she trusted. Years passed, and Lily became a ghost in her own town. She attended public school where the other kids either ignored her or mocked her. Teachers assumed she was slow, developmentally delayed, not worth the extra effort. No one knew that late at night, in Mrs. Gable's tiny apartment, Lily was composing symphonies in her head. No one knew that her silence was not emptiness, but a vast ocean of feeling with no outlet except her fingertips on those chipped plastic keys. Then came the announcement about a new talent competition, American's Golden Dream, holding auditions in the nearest big city, nearly 3 hours away. Mrs. Gable saw the commercial on television and looked at Lily, who was staring at the screen with an expression the old woman had never seen before. It was not hope exactly, hope had been beaten out of Lily long ago. It was something quieter, a flicker, a question mark. Mrs. Gable used her last $75 of Social Security money to buy 2 bus tickets to the city. She told Lily that it was time the world heard her voice, even if that voice had no words. The day of the audition was chaos. Thousands of people crowded the convention center, singers, dancers, comedians, all desperate for their 15 minutes of fame. Lily stood in line for 8 hours, holding her sign around her neck that read, "My name is Lily, I play piano, I do not speak." People stared. Some laughed. A security guard tried to remove her, thinking she was lost or confused. But Mrs. Gable, old and frail as she was, stood her ground and refused to leave. Finally, Lily's number was called. She walked onto that massive stage, blinded by the lights, facing 4 of the biggest names in entertainment. The audience was restless, already tired after hours of mediocre performances. The judges exchanged glances, skeptical. One of them, a famous pop star known for her sharp tongue, sighed loudly and said, "Okay sweetheart, show us what you got." Lily sat at the grand piano, her hands hovering above the keys. For a moment, nothing happened. The silence stretched, uncomfortable, awkward. People in the audience began to whisper. Another judge reached for his water glass, barely paying attention. Then Lily closed her eyes, and her fingers touched the keys. What came out of that piano was not music. It was a confession. It was 17 years of silence pouring out in waves of sound. She played a piece she had composed herself, a piece without a name, but everyone in that theater understood exactly what it meant. It started softly, tentatively, like a child peeking out from behind a curtain. Then it swelled into something powerful, chords that spoke of loss, of longing, of a love that had nowhere to go. The melody twisted and turned, sometimes gentle, sometimes thunderous, telling a story that words could never capture. Halfway through, the audience was crying. Not just a few people, but almost everyone, grown men in suits, grandmothers with tissues, teenagers on their phones who had looked up and forgotten to scroll. The pop star judge who had sighed earlier now had tears streaming down her face, her hand pressed against her mouth. The other judges sat frozen, witnessing something they had never seen in all their years in entertainment. When Lily played the final note, the silence that followed was different. It was sacred. Then the theater exploded. People were on their feet, screaming, clapping, whistling. Lily sat still at the piano, her eyes still closed, her chest heaving. She did not understand what was happening. She had never performed for anyone before, never known what it felt like to be heard. The judges looked at each other. The pop star was the first to speak, but her voice cracked and she had to start again. She said, "I have been in this business for 30 years. I have heard thousands of singers, thousands of musicians. But I have never, ever been moved like this. You did not say a single word, and yet you told us your entire life story. You made us feel what you feel. That is not talent. That is magic." She stood up, walked around the judges' table, and approached Lily. She knelt down so they were eye level, and she said, "You deserve to be heard by the whole world." Then she reached over and slammed the golden buzzer. Gold confetti exploded everywhere. The audience lost their minds. Lily looked at Mrs. Gable, who was standing in the wings, sobbing with joy. For the first time in 17 years, Lily's face broke into a smile, a real smile, wide and bright and full of light. The video of her performance went viral overnight. Within 48 hours, it had been viewed 50 million times. News stations called her the Silent Angel. Record labels fought to sign her. A famous composer offered to produce an album of her original pieces. Lily Martinez, the forgotten girl from nowhere, became the most famous person in America. But then came the twist that no one saw coming. As reporters dug into her past, they discovered the truth about her father. He was not dead, as Lily had assumed. He was living in a trailer park just 20 miles from where she grew up. And when he saw his daughter on television, he saw dollar signs. He hired a lawyer and went to the press, claiming that he had been searching for Lily for years, that Mrs. Gable had kidnapped her, that he deserved a share of her earnings and a place in her life. The tabloids went crazy. Headlines screamed about the bitter custody battle. Lily, who had just found her voice through music, was plunged back into silence, terrified that the man who had haunted her childhood would drag her back into his world. The stress was so immense that she stopped playing. For weeks, she refused to touch a piano. She barely ate. She barely slept. The light that had flickered on that stage began to fade. Mrs. Gable, now 82 years old and fighting her own health battles, refused to give up. She went on every news channel, telling the real story, the story of the little girl left alone in the cold, the father who drank himself into oblivion, the years of silence and survival. The public rallied behind Lily and Mrs. Gable. A crowdfunding campaign raised over $1 million for Lily's legal defense and future. But the biggest twist came from Lily herself. One night, alone in Mrs. Gable's apartment, she sat at that old, beat-up keyboard that had started it all. She began to play. But this time, the music was different. It was angry. It was powerful. It was a declaration of war against the man who had stolen her childhood. A reporter who happened to be outside the apartment recorded the music through an open window and posted it online. Within hours, it had millions of views. People called it the Revenge Symphony. The court case went to trial, broadcast live on national television. At the climax, the judge asked Lily if she wanted to say anything. She walked to a piano that had been placed in the courtroom, at the request of her legal team. She played one final piece. In that music, she told the story of her father's cruelty, her mother's death, her years of hunger and fear, and the love of an old woman who saved her. When she finished, there was not a dry eye in the courtroom, including the judges. The judge ruled in Lily's favor, terminating her father's parental rights and granting Mrs. Gable legal guardianship. The courtroom erupted in applause. Lily walked over to Mrs. Gable, hugged her tight, and for the first time in her life, she whispered 2 words into the old woman's ear. "Thank you." Mrs. Gable wept, holding the girl she had raised, the girl who had finally found her voice. Lily went on to record multiple albums, perform at Carnegie Hall, and start a foundation for mute and traumatized children, providing them with music therapy and safe housing. She never forgot where she came from. Every year on the anniversary of her audition, she returns to that tiny apartment and plays the old keyboard for Mrs. Gable, who still lives there, refusing to move anywhere else. Lily Martinez proved that the loudest voices are not always the ones that speak. Sometimes, the most powerful messages come in silence, waiting for someone brave enough to listen. So now I want to ask you, the person watching this video right now. From which part of the country are you watching? Tell me your state, your city, your town in the comments below. Let us see how far Lily's story has reached. And if this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Because you never know who might be sitting in silence, waiting for someone to finally listen.